Here at Special Effect, we're frequently asked how to access games using just one hand. While there are also some specific single-handed options out there, you can also create your own customised setup using a standard Xbox One controller and the Xbox Adaptive Controller. In this video, we'll be looking at some ways of doing this using 3 games that can be played without the right joystick: racing games, FIFA and first-person shooters. These options will not work for every game. This video will demonstrate how to set up single-handed options using a mixture of button remapping and plugging external accessibility switches into the Xbox Adaptive Controller. You can remap most of the buttons on the standard Xbox One controller. However, the trigger buttons, you can swap these, but you cannot remap them. If you're using the Xbox Adaptive Controller, you will need to set up Copilot with your standard Xbox One controller and the Xbox Adaptive Controller. In most driving games, the left joystick is used to steer the car and the trigger buttons are used for accelerate and brake. The first option you can try for left-handed play would be plug an accessibility switch into right trigger, which will make the car accelerate. The second option for left-handed play in driving games would be to swap the 2 trigger buttons over, so RT becomes LT. You can then plug in an accessibility switch for LT. This is a good option if having an analog accelerator is important. LT on the controller is now acting as accelerate, and the switch plugged into LT on the Xbox Adaptive Controller is doing brake. So in driving games, as a default, the left joystick does the steering. So to use the right joystick to do the steering, you need to swap the joysticks over. You can do this in the button remapping. You can also use an accessibility switch plugged into the Xbox Adaptive Controller for left trigger, which will be your brake. FIFA 19 has some great accessibility options such as 1 and 2 button mode, which you can use to reduce the number of controls you need to play the game. We will use the full control layout, but you can think about these options if you want to make it a bit simpler. So the first option for FIFA 19 for left-handed play would be that you could map all of the face buttons over to the D-pad. You could also swap the triggers so that LT becomes RT, which is sprint. The second option for FIFA 19 with left-handed play would be to use accessibility switches for some or all of the buttons on the controller if you wished. This is a great option because it means that you don't have to take your thumb off the left joystick, so you can direct your passes. So this yellow switch is plugged into the A button for pass. However, you could plug it into whichever button you wanted and have as many switches as you wanted. So in FIFA 19, the left joystick controls the player movement. For right-handed play, the first option would be that you could swap the joysticks over. You could then remap LB with RB so you have access to switch players. The second option for FIFA 19 for right-handed play would be to swap the joysticks over and then use accessibility switches for as many of the buttons on the controller as you wish. This is a really good option because it means you don't have to take your thumb off the right joystick, so you can direct your passes and your shots. In this example, we have an ultralight switch plugged into the A button in the Xbox Adaptive Controller. First-person games require the use of both joysticks, one joystick to move the player and the other to control the camera. At Specialeffect, we have a way of enabling you to play first-person games with one joystick to move the camera and an accessibility switch to act as a walk forward. So as default, in most first-person games, the right joystick controls the camera and the left joystick controls player movement. Most first-person games allow you to swap this over in the game settings, so you can swap it over to southpaw, and then the left stick will do the camera and the right stick will do the player movement. You can swap the joysticks over in the Xbox itself, however this means that for menus and things you will have to stretch over and use the right joystick. For this reason, it's probably best to swap the sticks in the game if the game will allow you to. So now the joysticks are swapped, so the left stick is doing your camera and up on right stick is your walk forward. To gain access to the right stick, the best thing to do is to plug an accessibility switch into the X1 socket on the Xbox Adaptive Controller. As default, this does up on left stick, so you need to go into the Xbox accessories and change it to up on right stick. So for these face buttons, you can remap them over to the D-pad if that's what you decide to do, or you could plug in some accessibility switches for them. I'm just mapping the A button, which is jump in Call of Duty, over to down on the D-pad. So with this setup so far, there's still a couple of buttons on the right-hand side that might be a bit tricky. That's RT, which is your shoot button, and RB, which in this game is your grenades. So the best thing to do for these two buttons is to plug in a couple of accessibility switches. So the red switch is shoot, and green switch is grenade or special move. Right-handed play in first-person games is a little bit easier than left-handed because the game defaults as the right stick doing the camera, so you don't need to swap the joysticks over. And you've also already got all the face buttons over on the right side of the controller. For a walk forward, what you need to do is plug in an accessibility switch into the X1 socket on the Xbox Adaptive Controller. This defaults as up on left stick, so you don't need to do anything in the button remapping for this. The only two buttons you don't have on the right-hand side of the controller are LT and LB. The best way to get these two buttons is to plug in a couple of accessibility switches into the Xbox Adaptive Controller. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions on accessible gaming, please contact Specialeffect.